How can we make a better world for farmers on the land and the sea? Stay tuned as Kay talks with commercial fisherman and grassroots community organizer Sarah Schumann about why advocacy is so important and how producers can get involved. If you're the woman who does it all, farm work, housework, bookwork, homework, getting up at the break of dawn, this is the podcast for you.
How do you multiply by fractions, Mom?
Get away from the cares of the day. Free stock, root stock, feed stock, seed stock. Chat with women around the world who raise food, flowers, and fun. With your host, Kay Castrataro. That's me. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Food, Flowers, and Fun Visits with Farm Women from around the world. As always, we are sponsored by Penlight for Farmers, which is equipping farm women to remove the barriers between their lives and the farm lives that they really have always wanted. And today, we have a really exciting guest. We are branching out into the world of ocean farming, which I just think is so great that we're doing that. And I have Sarah Schumann with us. She is a commercial fisherman. She has lots of advocacy roles that she's doing. And Sarah, welcome to our show today. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to join you.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you. So anybody who watches this show regularly knows that I kind of just jump in and start asking you to tell me who you are, how you got into doing what you're doing. I love that you are a fisherman. You fish in both Rhode Island and Alaska. So why don't you just start there and tell us how you got into being a commercial fisherman to begin with.
Sure. So unlike a lot of fishermen, I did not grow up in a fishing family or even in a fishing town. I grew up in Washington, D.C. My parents both worked at least for a time, for the federal government. So typical D.C. kid. And was really inspired by my fourth grade teacher. It was 1990 and it was the 20-year anniversary of Earth Day. It was like a big deal. Um, And so we learned from our weekly reader exercise in fourth grade about, we talked about the greenhouse effect, as they call it then, climate change, we call it now, and, air pollution and water pollution and loss of biodiversity and endangered species. And I just felt really called by that. It kept me up at night for a long time, thinking about what I could do, and just felt like that was my destiny, but didn't really know how to sort of operationalize that destiny within the structure of a life. Um, and so, um,
Yeah, because especially even as a young person, advocacy is not it's not like a career path that people are normally putting you on. It's like, are you going to be a teacher? Are you going to be a doctor? Are you going to be a lawyer? For us, are you going to be a farmer? But not so much are you going to advocate for others who can't advocate for themselves, including the environment. So,
I'd say that growing
yeah.
up in DC, it actually is. It's a little different when you
Oh,
grow up in DC. It's very much a career path that you are surrounded by. I mean, a lot of my neighbors' parents were in that world. I mean, a lot of my kids' parents and neighbors were in that world. But I think for that reason, maybe it didn't appeal to me as much. That seemed to me like the sort of, I don't know, the path of least resistance in a way. And I felt like other people are going to take that path. Good, solid, ethical, capable people are going to take that path of being a paid, inside the Beltway lobbyist for the environment. The world doesn't need one more of those. What the world needs more of is grassroots environmentalists, people who are living and working and living out there in the rest of the world, depending on the environment, interacting with the actual natural environment,
yeah.
every day of their lives and standing up for it. So I was trying to figure out how I could be something like that. And when everything clicked for me was when I was on the coast of Chile. I had dropped out of college after 2 years. I was 20 years old. I was kicking around on the coast of Chile and just being a bohemian vagabond. But I met some small scale commercial fishermen. They called themselves artisanal fishermen. They went to sea in like a 20-foot skiff set some gill nets, caught their fish, brought it in. Typically, the female members of the family would help with marketing it, processing and marketing it. And then a lot of them would go to Congress and rally and advocate in their spare time. Some of them were focused on keeping industrial fleets offshore, so they weren't coming in inshore into the nearshore waters and affecting that habitat and the fisheries that these small-scale fishermen depended on.
Yeah.
Some of them were focused on industrial pollution from pulp mills and how to prevent that entering and contaminating the estuaries. And I was just
Mhm.
like totally, totally enamored of what they were doing, totally inspired in a way that I can only describe as like lust um, for what they did and wanting to be just like
Like
them.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how I
So
entered fishing.
you knew what you wanted to be when you grew up.
Exactly.
And
It
so
clicked.
how long were you down there with them in Chile?
I was there for about a year and a half and then decided to come back and didn't know how. I knew where I wanted to get, but I didn't know how to get there. So I decided to go back to college at the University of Rhode Island. It was at that time, may still be, the only university in the country that had a marine affairs program for undergraduates. So I figured, okay, maybe if I go take some classes, I'll figure out how to be a fisherman. Seemed logical to me based on what I knew then. And so that's what I did, and it actually worked because there were some other fishermen in my graduating class, and there was uh, a particular individual, Dan Orchard, who was getting a master's there at the same time in the Marine Affairs Department, and he ran um, a newspaper, like a very hyper-local newspaper called the Fisherman's Call, which was just stories from, what's going on in Point Judith. And he actually had a distribution. It was a paper newspaper. This was like barely, on the precipice of internet being a big thing.
Right.
So he was doing that. So of course he knew everybody. And so I talked to him and it's like, well, what I really want to do, like, don't tell anybody, but my dream is to be a commercial fisherman. Do you have any idea how I can do that? Um, and so he was like, yes, you should go talk to Andrea at the bait shack in Point Judith. And so I went to talk to Andrea, and Andrea knows everyone because she buys the lobster bait from the draggers and then she sells it to the lobstermen. So she knows everyone in the fleet.
Okay.
And so I went and saw her and I told her again, kind of sheepishly, like, I've never set foot on a fishing boat, but I know this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. Um, and she connected me with Rich Cook on the Sandra Lynn, who at that time was deckhandless. Um, and so he hired me, and that's where I started out. And then since then, that was more than 20 years ago now. I've worked on a bunch of different boats in Point Judith, and then started going to Alaska um, in 2008 as well. Worked at a cannery for 9 years, actually, in a salmon cannery in Dillingham, Alaska,
So, so
and
tell
then
me
switched
how
to
you did
fishing
that
there.
because I mean I get it that it's all fish, but it seems to me that the sort of fish that you're going to be fishing for down on in Rhode Island is going to be much different than what you're doing up in Alaska. And you said you're salmon fishing
Mhm.
up in Alaska. So how did you make that jump?
You
Because so
know,
far, I
well,
mean, now you're going from like DC down to Chile, back up here to the East Coast, and then all the way to Alaska. So it's almost like you're doing the whole coast.
yeah, I don't really like to stay in one place for very long. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I did a degree in marine affairs at URI. The summer after I graduated, they kept me on as a research assistant for a project in Alaska. And that was my first time in Alaska, and we went and we interviewed fishermen, or not fishermen, community members, I should say, in um, a bunch of the teeny tiny villages in the Norton Sound region, so right around Nome, like a bunch of teeny tiny villages, native villages for the most part. And so we went and we interviewed community members to learn about some fisheries, some economic development programs that they had in that area related to fisheries. And we were sitting at the kitchen table with one young man in one of the villages, and he was telling us about how he had been out as part one of these economic development programs. There had been sort of a career development aspect to it, and he had been given the opportunity to go out on a pollock processor vessel
Yep.
during the wintertime. And he came home with like some ungodly amount of money. And when I heard him say the dollar figure, um, I was like, ooh, where do I sign up for that? And so I sort of figured out like how to, who the pollock companies were, and I went on and like filled out an online application for every single one. One of them called me back and they were like, "You don't have any experience processing fish." I'm like, "I know." And they're like, "But you can get experience processing fish during salmon season. That's the entry level. And if you can prove yourself there, then we could consider giving you a processing job for pollock season, which is where the big money is." So I did the same thing all over again for salmon season. And again, only one company called me back. Um,
But one is all it
One is
takes.
all it
Like,
takes.
I
Yeah.
think this is like such a great place to put in one of these messages that is like that it doesn't matter how many rejections you get because you really only need one person to say yes. And it only needs to be that one. And it's the same in every type of business, but agriculture especially, if you want to get in and you're trying something new, you only need that one opportunity. And so you got this opportunity, you jumped on it, you did the legwork, and so apparently you must have done well enough in the salmon to finally get to pollock. Am I right about that?
No, I found
No,
out I loved salmon. I didn't want to leave salmon.
love you. So the money just wasn't enough to drag you away from salmon. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I guess what happened, I really loved the salmon and I wanted to stick with that. So I worked at a cannery for 9 years and then started on salmon fishing boats. So I've done both sides of the salmon industry and I'm obsessed with salmon. I'm obsessed with that whole area of Bristol Bay, Alaska and the industry and the community and everything. Um, but it also sort of became important to me to dedicate some time each year to the advocacy that I wanted to do. And so the winter time, which is when pollock season is, that's really the time that I've carved out to focus full time on the advocacy work that I do.
Okay. And so why don't we talk about that? Because I think one of the things that I really love about your story is how the advocacy and the actual work of, water farming were so connected to you and from the very beginning. Like you had that desire to be not just somebody who was advocating, but also somebody who was experiencing what it was like to be a producer. And so I think this is something really important for all aspects of agriculture because farmers, I think, often will look at advocacy as something that either somebody else does for them or something that they don't have the time or the energy or the expertise to do. And and I think that, there are places, as you said, for those professional advocates, but I think there's also a place for the people who are doing the work to advocate for themselves. So why don't you talk to me about the difference you see in that and how that plays out for you?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. Um, and I agree that I also feel with fishermen it's the same thing, that a lot of people don't want to be bothered. They want somebody else to do that for them. Some sort of paid advocate, ideally paid by somebody else, who just reads your mind and, gets you what you want. But so much of the time there's sort of this bifurcation, right, between like scientists and fishermen, or advocates and fishermen, or advocates and farmers with different skill sets, different sort of occupational communities. They wind up having different values and they wind up having this sort of siloed thing. And really that is all sort of to the detriment of like accountability, I think, that if you really truly want to have agency, you have to do some things yourself and you have to sort of merge those roles of being the farmer or being the fisherman and the advocate. I guess advocacy may not be the best word. I use sort of a community organizing model because community organizing is, at its in its purest sense about being, organizing your peers. So being a member of the community that you're seeking to empower as opposed to separate from it.
Yep. Oh, I'm loving that. So I was really struck by your comment about there being different values between the researchers, the actual fishermen, the community members, paid advocates, and and I find that really interesting because I believe that our work should start with our values because if we're meeting those values, we're going to have more joy and sense of success in the work that we're doing. So I'd be really interesting to have you talk about the differences in values between the fishermen and the paid advocates, community members, all of that kind of thing. One would think that a lot of those values would align for these different groups. And so can you talk about some of the ways that you see the values being the same and some of the ways that they're different and how that plays out in the work?
One of the things that really jumps out to me working, with both communities at different times, both sort of the professionals, whether they're scientists, advocates, NGOs, consultants, whatever, and fishermen who are catching fish and then volunteering their time as advocates is, I guess, how we define sort of merit. And there's sort of an implicit hierarchy involved in
Mm,
each community that doesn't always align. I guess with professionals in general, there's a sort of like careerism that kind of takes hold. And there, of course, there is like, in fishing, you also want to achieve success, right? By working your way up from deckhand to captain, by having a nice boat that's well maintained, by catching a lot of fish. Everybody has sort of their metrics of success. Um, but sometimes, the professional metrics of success, I think, can get in the way of like, um, can clash with sometimes with the ability of of the fishing community or whatever other community we're talking about to fully have sort of uh to fully sort of have control of the situation or have a voice or have agency. I'm not sure what I'm trying to get at, so this is not great
No,
for a
no, no,
podcast,
that's
but
okay.
I've
We're
been
big
in
fans of
multiple,
talking through it and
yeah.
then coming like kind of batting the ideas around as we figure it out. And this careerism is something I like that word because with the land farmers, I bring up this concept of what a good farmer is. Like, what does it mean to be, how do you have to work a certain number of hours? Do you have to get a certain percentage of your income? Like, do what style of farming do you do? And so I'm curious as to how that works also in the fishing industry, whether there are those same kinds, like certain types of fishermen are more fishermen than others. Like, are
Absolutely.
there
Oh yeah,
types of fish?
full-timers
I mean, you're
hate
talking about
part-timers,
pollock,
totally
salmon.
judged. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So
definitely.
talk.
There's totally, of course, there's hierarchies in any occupational community, including fishing.
Mhm. So where do you see that playing out? Like, where do you see some of the, maybe if there's stigma or like people who are not considered to be quite as legitimate in the fishing community, or and how does that play out in advocacy as well? Like, how does that disconnect between different groups of fishermen translate into advocacy? Does that
Well,
question make
yeah,
sense?
in fishing, I think that to achieve sort of status as a fisherman, you want to not be a deckhand like I am, right? You want to work your way up to, either a very respected captain of a larger vessel or an owner operator, um, by a certain point in your career, right? You want to be in the wheelhouse, and you don't want to be impoverished, right? You want to catch enough fish to to have a boat that looks well maintained, to pay you know, to pay everyone you're supposed to pay, and then support your family, right? Like,
Right.
um, if you're a highliner, even better, right? If you're one of the people who's really pioneered a new fishery, that earns you status. In my case, I haven't achieved any of those things. So I have found, and this is, I think, particularly, this may have a little bit of a gendered element to it, but I feel I've achieved some status in the fishing industry through my advocacy, sort of
Mhm.
by being a community builder and a bridge builder and earning that trust and that respect from the rest of my community that way. Because I
Right.
sure haven't really earned it in the conventional way. Like I'm still a deckhand after 20 years in the industry. Um, and that's because these other things matter more to me. I define status differently, I guess, than the
So that's a
professionals.
matter of choice. Like, I think that I love, again, that's going back to your values, that in order to end up in the wheelhouse, there are other things that you might have to give up. And you're not willing to do that because those other things matter a lot to you. Okay, so one of the other things that is a big passion for me in the farming community is working on things like mental health and that work-life balance and good communication with people, and you being an advocate and also a woman in a predominantly male job, which I noticed that you call yourself a fisherman, which I love that because, we have gone to all of these gendered terms, but it seems like the fishing industry has not gone that way. So,
No.
so, so for better or for worse, but I love that there is a culture around that. And so I'm wondering how you manage to stay kind of grounded and how you take care of yourself in an occupation that is very physical. It's got to be emotionally stressful, requires a lot of communication, and you're dealing with a gender who definitely has its own set of views of women, excuse me, in certain industries. So, how do you take care of yourself in that context? What do you do for yourself?
Hmm. I could probably do better at that. I'm trying to spend more time thinking about work-life balance. Um, I am lucky though. I mean, I sort of I achieve balance through the two aspects of my work. Like I find the advocacy to be at times very stress-inducing and very heartbreaking, um,
Mm.
especially right now. Um, the
Yeah,
fishing
talk
is
to me
where I
about
sort of
that.
alleviate that because being a deckhand, especially, I don't have any responsibility. I just get to do what I'm told. I have the great privilege of working for two captains, one in Alaska and one on Rhode Island, who are dear friends. Um, and that is my happy place, right? On the boat. That is where I go to relax. I work hard, I sweat, I get exhausted, I sleep hard. Um, but that sort of recharges me to then come back to my computer and get online and read about what's going on in the world and figure out how I can try to make it better. That's the hard part. Sometimes it's inspiring too, and sometimes it's devastating.
Yeah, no, well, I can empathize with that because I had that experience when I was in college, actually, because I would be at school and working so hard mentally. Like just I always had like 17 to 19 credit hours. Like I was always just a full course load and worked really hard. And then I would come home to the farm and it's like I would shut my brain off. And, not to say that farming doesn't require brain power, but as you said, at that point, I was a field hand, which is the farming equivalent of being a deckhand. You do what you're told, you're doing all the physical stuff, and it was so therapeutic for me to be able to just go and work hard, be exhausted, sleep hard, and not and kind of give my brain a break. So I definitely see how those two aspects of your life can be mutually reinforcing, that you can kind of rest from one while doing the other. What do you find to be some of the most challenging aspects of the advocacy work right now?
Well, it's all people work. People, it's always harder to work with people than with fish or vegetables or farm
Mm,
animals. Um, it's just more complex. And even people who you think are your, you know, closest, most trusted collaborators can turn out not to be. That's happened to me multiple times, and that sucks.
mm,
And then you go through times when you invest, like the last 2.5 years I invested, didn't have grant money, a little bit here and there, not enough to pay me or to really pay most of the expenses, to work on this report where we interviewed 150 fishermen across 8 states and 30 key informants, port managers, policymakers, et cetera, to produce an 18-volume set of reports on how to transition to a low carbon fishing fleet and how to put fishermen themselves at the helm of that energy transition. January 20th, Donald Trump and JD Vance sweep into office. We're not doing an energy transition anymore. We're not doing
mm,
federal funding that would definitely be required to support fishing vessels in making that energy transition. Fishermen who I knew who had received small grants to reduce their carbon footprint, make their vessels more energy efficient, got those grants clawed back. Um,
mm.
we're pulling out of the Paris Agreement. We're reversing the EPA's endangerment finding. We repealed the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, this has been devastating. This has just been totally, totally heartbreaking. And that's just, I'm just talking about the climate, and related piece of it. So,
Right. Sure.
yeah, I mean, I sank everything I had the last 4 years into trying to ensure that the energy transition didn't happen in a way in which the fishing community got left out or got rolled over,
Mm.
but instead could be part of the energy transition, part of creating a better, cleaner, greener world. And now it just feels like it was all
And
a
such an
waste.
important, like really such an important thing because we are trying to look at the whole system and to say like we are a system. Like people and the environment have to work together because we depend upon each other. And different industries depend on each other. And so I think what you're pointing to is really critical that you did the work to get people's voices heard and so that policies weren't made that would be detrimental to the people still doing their work because let's face it, I mean how many fishing vessels are carbon neutral even like it's kind of like big rigs, like how long did it take to be able to get emissions and all of that kind of stuff down. Like that's a long process and it's an expensive process, especially for the producers and the owner operators, all of those people who are actually trying to make a living. And so I think that's always been one of the tensions with the climate issue is that we want to take care of the environment and we want to make sure that people can continue to make a living while we're making these changes. And so, 4 years, like I think it's important for people to realize that 4 years of research goes into how to do this well. And then when all of that funding suddenly gets cut, there's like, then what do you do? Like, it can't go forward. Does it go backwards? Like, do it,
Yeah, and
where
when the
where does that
time
leave people? So
in
I'm curious, like, have you talked to any of the actual fishermen since the funding got cut? Like, have you gone back to them to see how that resonates with them or doesn't resonate with them? Were they in favor of doing the transition? What was that like for you working with them? Was it an uphill battle to get them to say, "Oh, this might be a good idea"? Or were they saying, "No, we want this. It's just really expensive. How do we make it happen?"
I I don't I mean for one thing the fishing industry has a relatively low carbon footprint as food in terms of compared to other protein sources.
Hmm.
Fish, wild harvest fish are actually among the very lowest on a per pound basis. So we don't feel like we're major contributors in the grand scheme of things to the problem of climate change.
Hmm.
Um, that said, we're directly impacted by climate change ourselves, so it's in our interest to see it addressed. And if it's going to be addressed, if petroleum is going to stay in the ground, which is where we need to eventually go to, a place where it stays in the ground, then what are we going to run our vessels on? Like we have very limited options. Diesel has been there for us for 100 years, and we trust it. There is no sort of equivalent substitute out there yet. Certainly not one that costs the same, or that feels reliable, as reliable. It's a much harder equation than an on-road vehicle, an on-road passenger vehicle.
Right.
So, and at the same time, we were sort of, there was some excitement among especially the younger members of the fleet that we interviewed in just innovating and pioneering new things because a lot of the fishing fleet is old. We have older boats, we have older people, we have older port infrastructure, and there's an interest in sort of modernizing the fleet, rejuvenating the people involved a bit, generational continuity. Um, so there's a little bit of appeal there too, with just trying to sort of be at the forefront of innovation. But none of
Yeah.
it's remotely possible without federal subsidies. It's just not. And
Mm.
it's also becomes less compelling without sort of an economy-wide decarbonization plan, because we certainly don't. The point of this research was that we don't want to be the last ones to decarbonize, but we also don't want to be the first. We want to be in the
Mm.
middle of the pack. and we need help to do it. And if the economy as a whole is not moving that way for a while, we're not going to be the first movers. It's just not in our interests. Um,
Yeah. Oh, that's a really interesting, you don't want to be the last, but you don't want to be the first. And so that puts you in a really interesting position and kind of a holding pattern.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this
So
is the danger of being sort of a grassroots advocate, right, or activist, is all the time you sink into something as a passion project. It all comes from the heart. It's on top of what you're trying to do to make a living. And when it doesn't pan out, I think it'd be crushing for a professional as well, emotionally crushing, but it wouldn't be financially crushing. So like that's sort of a lesson learned, I guess, of why it is so hard. The more time I spend trying to be a fisherman activist in this world, a grassroots environmental activist, the role I have wanted for myself since I was 9 years old, the more I realize why there aren't more people out there doing it, unfortunately.
because it's a hard job.
Yeah.
It's a super hard job. And so, I think this is a really common issue across the board where, a lot of the farmers that I talk to, the ones who are advocates, um, they do have to make it almost a part of their business plan. Like it's part of how they structure their work. It's how they structure their farm business. And so, I hear that that's part of what you do, with making the balance that the winter time is your predominantly advocacy time. Um, and how does that work with how the rest of the government functions and all that kind of thing? Do you feel like you can take a few months off from advocacy and still have the impact that you want to, or do you need to have a group around you where you're continuing the work? Well, the group is continuing the work, but you can do other things. How do you experience that?
That's also a challenge, just the scheduling. Yeah, it's exactly the same for farmers. Like for fishermen, even more so perhaps because our schedules are a little less predictable because of weather. We look at the weather the night before and decide whether to go. And sometimes we have a longer day than we've expected because of weather or unexpected things. Like
Hurricanes.
seals eating all our fish. So we have to haul the gear twice in one day so the seals don't get to it first. Like, I think there's even an increased element of unpredictability compared to farming. But what is the same for both of us is we have really intense work cycles during the growing months or the fishing months. Um, and it's so hard for other to explain that to other people, even my
Mm.
parents. But when they want me to do something with them, it's like, well, can you be here on a certain date? I'm like, I don't know. I'll have to tell you the day before. Um, and planning meetings, answering emails, with professional collaborators is also, I mean, I feel like half the time I appear like I'm dropping the ball or I'm, ghosting people. Um, because I
Mm.
don't show up. I have at times actually run Zoom meetings on my earbuds while picking fish with my hands. It's not a good way to run a meeting, but but once in a while you find yourself in that situation. You got to do what you got to do. But it's
Well,
definitely a
I
challenge.
will I will tell you, I was on a phone call with a flower grower not too long ago, and she was cutting sunflowers while balancing the phone and like and I kept saying, "Are you sure this is a good time?" And she was like, "This is actually very, very therapeutic for me to talk to you while I'm doing this. And
Yeah.
I've got 400 stems and they're
Mm.
going to go much faster talking to you." And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
okay, like if it's working for you, I'm okay with that. But yeah, so again, really, really challenging and something that not everybody is willing to put the effort into doing. And so talk to me about how that communication works, because I can imagine that would be really challenging when you know that you're not ghosting somebody, you know that you're actually just doing your job and that your job really is not schedule driven. Like it doesn't follow your Google Calendar. So, so how have you learned to communicate about that with people who might not understand that very well? Because one would think that in fishing advocacy, people would understand that a little bit, but it sounds like maybe not so much.
I think it just takes a while for it to sink in because it's so different from the workaday world that most professionals find themselves in. Um, so I just have to kind of keep harping on it and like make it a little bit of a thing, like I don't know, like an interest point, a curiosity or something to remind people, oh, it's, there's it's looking good for tomorrow, or we've got to go tomorrow because it's gale warning on Friday or whatever. Like, I don't know, just let people in a little bit to the experience.
Yes. I love that because I think it is true for all types of farming that um, sometimes because we're in it, we think that everybody should just get it. They should understand it, which, nobody really understands anybody else's life unless we let them in. I love how you use that. So there is a sense in which we might feel like explaining sounds like defending ourselves or justifying ourselves, which I suspect fishermen are the same, but we don't like to do that. Like farmers don't like to sit there and have to explain to you why we're doing what we're doing. Like you should just kind of figure it out. And yet there's a real beauty when we're able to bring that to the table and to say, no, I really want to do this work and I want to make it easy for you. And I'm dealing with constraints that I have no control over. So unfortunately, I have to wait to see what the weather looks like. I can give you a tentative, but it might change. And I know we had a call that we had to do that because you were like, "Oh, I have to go out on the boat." And I'm like, "Okay, you got to go out on the boat." Like for me, totally makes sense. I have a friend who's a lobsterman. So I'm like, yeah, when the lobster are there, you got to go get the lobster. Like you kind of just can't just sit around. So I love that idea of telling people, letting them in, explaining and making it a thing, as you said, like just making it part of the everyday conversation as opposed to, sure, we'll schedule this meeting and then right before the meeting or the day before the meeting having to cancel it or reschedule it. If as you're scheduling it, you can put some of those caveats in place. I think that's very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And do you find that the more you let people in, the more flexible they are with you or the more tolerant they are?
Yeah, but it's still hard. I mean, it's just not like practically speaking, if you're trying to, especially if you're in a leadership role, like in a group. If you're trying to lead a group of 10 people, it's really across time zones. It's really hard to reschedule because you had to go fishing. So it's not just a matter of people understanding. Sometimes it's just logistically hard. There's just a
Yeah,
certain incompatibility there between the lifestyle.
right. So talk to me about some of the other ways you navigate that because, I see a lot of issues come up, even in Rhode Island, things come up during the growing season and, Farm Bureau, for example, will be like, "Hey, we need to get all the farmers up to the state house." And the farmers are like, "Are you kidding me? It's the middle of August and I'm like harvesting 19 hours a day. Like, are you kidding me?" And how does that work? So how do you manage that when you're the one leading these meetings and the fishing is not cooperating?
Yeah, I mean, just figure out, I mean, like I said, I have run Zoom meetings while fishing, while I've got my gloves on. Um, Sometimes, you have to find a backup. You have to make sure somebody else can step up if you're not there. Uh,
So I'm
yeah,
hearing building a team
yeah,
is a really important aspect of this so
yeah.
that when you're not able to do some of those things, somebody else can step in. Do you feel like you've been able to create a good team who can support you in that way? Or is that a work
Yeah,
in
I mean, there's
progress?
there's a lot of different collaborative activities that I've been engaged in. So it's not always the same team, but
Mhm.
um, yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely I've had times where I suddenly couldn't show up and my collaborator just stepped up and ran with it and no issues.
Yeah, that's so important. So if there were something that you would like, what are some of the big key issues that you see confronting fishermen right now, and especially women fishermen? Like maybe let's talk a little bit about that gender thing. What is it like being a woman in this industry?
It's pretty much a non-issue.
Mm,
When I got into it, it felt I was more conscious of it 20 years ago. Um, Partly because I was just new to the industry, and I'm not only a woman, I'm also just like, I stick out like a sore, at that time at least, I felt like I stuck out like a sore thumb in the industry just because I wasn't from it. Um, but now it doesn't feel, now I'm not even aware of it. And there seem to be more women than there used to be in Rhode Island. In Alaska, where I fish in the summer, there are tons of women. It's just completely normal. It's a total non-issue. I wouldn't say it's like 50-50, maybe 30% are women. This it's just off the top of my head, but it's very, very normal. And not just for deckhands. Around here, there are not a lot of female owner operators or captains. In Alaska, it's totally normal for a woman to own and run the boat, or for there to be an all-woman boat, where the captain and the crew are all females.
yeah.
So I think that sort of partly because of the Alaska experience too, the gender issue is just totally evaporated for me as an issue since I started fishing.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful thing to hear. Do you feel like the culture has shifted over the past 20 years, or do you think it's more your comfort level? Because as you say, you were from the outside. And so all of us know that anytime you walk into an industry that is also a lifestyle and you're like not from that lifestyle, we all know that that can be quite the challenge. So do you think it's more one of the other, like more your familiarity or more the culture shifting or a little bit of both?
It's so hard to say, when something is internal, when it's in your head versus external,
Yeah,
societal. It's really hard to tell sometimes. There have been efforts like by women fishermen, especially when social media was kind of, new and exciting and before it became just like a toxic waste dump. Um, like there were some efforts led by women, a fisherwoman in Maine and a fisherwoman who worked in Alaska from Washington, to sort of cultivate camaraderie and networking among women fishermen on both coasts. Um, and in addition to camaraderie, it also led to some of the gear, the wearable gear manufacturers like Grundens coming out with women's lines of clothing that actually were fit for the contour of a woman's body. Um,
right.
and Extra Tough now has women's boots designed by the Salmon Sisters, with not just designed for the fit of a woman's foot, but also embellished with gorgeous pictures. Because women like that, I guess. I mean, they're beautiful. I'm not mocking them. But yeah, so there has been, I would say, those are sort of points of evidence that there has been sort of a rising consciousness of women in the fishing industry.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, one of those things that you don't think about, but it's the same in agriculture as well, like lighter chainsaws, smaller, lighter chainsaws, so that women who aren't 6 feet tall can actually handle them and not be hurting themselves or, cutting a leg off or something because it slips out of their hands or tractors, designing the tractors so that they adjust better. Like you can actually move the seats and instead of like kind of scooching to the end of the seat and
Yeah,
hoping that your feet can hit the clutch at the same time. And so yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I'm thinking about rain gear
yeah,
because growing up, we had just rain gear and it was all men's size rain gear and it was oversized and it smelled because it's got like I don't know, it's just not nice. I'm not a big fan of rain gear, but you have to use it. I mean, but to have it designed for a woman is actually something that would be really helpful, because then it's not so big and bulky. It's not, you're not swimming in it and having all this extra. Would imagine it'd be safer because you don't have all that extra stuff that, for a man they need it, but for a woman it's just something that's going to get caught in the
Yep.
equipment.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
so yeah, oh, totally fascinating. So I love hearing about that. And do you engage in these more women-centered groups, or do you feel like it's kind of not really necessary for you?
To some extent, they sort of faded out. They were hot for a while and then they kind of faded out. I'm not sure why. Maybe they'd sort of accomplished their mission, but it was nice because it was just a generally more upbeat place than a lot of the more general fishermen's groups on social media, which can be pretty embittered a lot of the times.
Yeah.
And the women's groups were just all really mutually supportive and positive. It was nice.
Well, you are totally welcome to be in the Penlight for Farmers Facebook group, which,
Okay.
yes, it is social media. I will agree. And I've come into social media kicking and screaming. But again, it's a tool. We can use the tool for good or we can use it for evil. And I am definitely a person who wants to use it for good. So you can come and hang out with the cheerful women farmers and we can all talk
Sounds
about
great.
fun farming stuff, and
Yeah.
and bringing in the whole notion of, like, I think this advocacy. So I'm going to ask you the same question that I ask everybody at the end of my episode. If there were one thing that you felt all farmers or fishermen in this case should know, what would that be?
One thing I thought all farmers or fishermen should know,
Yeah. Like, if there were one message you could give to your peeps, what would that be?
I guess just to work together, to try to find solutions.
Mm.
I mean, a lot of the times we, as a community, and I don't know that this is unique to us, but we let ourselves get down and sort of let ourselves get captured by hopelessness, and frustration and grievance. And I don't know. Not only is that not fun, not helpful to one's mental health, um, but it doesn't solve any, it doesn't solve problems or lead to a better world. And I don't think it's impossible to strive to a better world. I think it's within our reach, but um, we have to work together and believe in ourselves and believe in each other. Something like that.
Don't put that look at the end, because I am 110% in accord with you. So no, I love that. And the truth is that when we focus on the things that can embitter us, we lose the ability to see potential, and we lose the ability to solve problems creatively. And so we not only are making ourselves feel bad, but we're actually keeping ourselves stuck in a place that we don't really want to be. And so
Yes.
when we can, as you said, work together, lift each other up, support one another and encourage one another to find hope, absolutely we can change the world. And we do it one fisherman, one farmer, one consumer, one um congressperson, one at a time. Like, that's how we do it. And oh, I love it. So thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us on Food, Flowers, and Fun. And thank you all out there for coming back for another episode. And we hope to have you on again soon.
Thank you. It was great to be here. Take care.
Excellent.
Bye.
How do you multiply by fractions, Mom?
Farmers calling, our show is all done. Goodbye, farewell, so long, adieu. See you next week, same time, same place for Food, Flowers, and Fun. Go in peace. Visit us at www.penlightfarmers.com.